guy's trying to kill me.
Who?
From a woman's worst nightmare.
You're pregnant.
Now things get really scary.
To a bold escape that turns into a wild chase.
A speed in excess of 100 miles an hour. Anything can go wrong.
A terrifying date night.
A couple enjoying a night out ends up stopping a masked and armed man.
Said call 911. No, I'm gonna help my husband.
And a shocking end to a burglary gone wrong. Jaw-dropping videos caught on camera.
Wait, what's wrong?
This guy's trying to kill me.
Who? You need police. Get in the car, get in the car. What's wrong?
It's a chilling encounter caught on a dash cam.
A brazen car theft captured on camera.
Video shows the frightening moment a pregnant mother and her young son were forced from their car during rush hour traffic.
Here you see a motorist going down the highway.
I realized there were all these cars stopped when they shouldn't have been stopped. And I saw one car in particular with its four-ways on. Usually that means like there's a problem.
And as you notice right here, you see a man standing in the front of that car.
Do you need help?
I thought the gentleman was having a medical emergency.
We feel a lot of empathy when we think that someone is in distress. We become altruistic because we want someone to help us if we need help.
Do you need help? You need help?
Yes.
What's wrong?
Put me in the backseat. This guy's trying to kill me.
Who?
When the man told me that somebody was trying to kill him, for a split second, I kind of believed him because he looked so distraught.
Put me in the backseat.
Why, what's wrong?
This guy's trying to kill me.
And then I looked for the threat, but I didn't see any.
We don't know his mental state. However, sometimes people who are having a psychotic break, they may be paranoid that someone's out to get them. And they perceive real things in the environment as being threats.
This guy's trying to kill me.
Who?
I'm trying to call him the guy.
Who's trying to kill you? No. What's going on?
He attempts to open up Roxy's back door.
At this point, she does a great job of staying calm and locking her doors.
Wait, what's wrong? What's wrong?
She has to determine, is this a scam? Is this a carjacking? Or is this a person who is actually in danger?
I could see like how distraught he was on his face. So like, I really thought he needed medical attention.
Who's trying to kill you?
They're trying. See, look at.
Here, go in front of my car. Go in front of my car.
And that's when I realized this man needs help. So I'm gonna call 911.
Just wait, just sit down.
911. Please stay on the line.
He's not gonna kill you.
Your call will be answered by the next available 911 agent.
Roxanne does a great job in the situation. She inquires as to whether or not she can actually help before she jumps in and puts herself in harm's way.
Suddenly, another car pulls up.
Veuillez ne pas raccrocher.
I was concerned, but there were two young guys behind me and they were yelling to the red car, "Don't let him in, don't let him in."
Please stay on the line. Ottawa 911.
But this car is not locked, so the man gets inside and finds a pregnant woman and her 8-year-old son.
When he got into the passenger side, I was like, because his whole demeanor changed when he popped in. Like, he went from a vulnerable posture to like aggressive. So I just knew something bad was happening.
Now things get really scary.
He's trying to kill me.
Who? Who's trying to kill you?
After claiming someone wants to murder him, the man forces his way into a car driven by a pregnant woman.
You need police.
He was like elbowing her into her stomach. She's 8-9 months pregnant.
In a panic, her young son jumps out of the car.
Get in the car. On Tremblay, there's a man assaulting somebody. He's trying to jack a car. Hey, get the out of the car.
After a few gut-wrenching moments,
He's stealing it right now.
the man forces the woman out of the car.
Yeah, because I'm pregnant. You're pregnant. Yeah.
Paramedics arrive and rush her to the hospital. Thankfully, she and the baby are okay. Roxy uploads the footage to her Facebook page, and it immediately goes viral.
The next day, I was on the news. Seen a lot of crimes happen in my life, unfortunately, but I've never seen that.
The dashcam footage of the harrowing ordeal is invaluable.
You could see his face really clear. And the cop loved that. He's like, we're gonna be able to submit a screenshot of this to our foot patrol officers and our cruisers, and they're gonna be able to ID him.
The next day, police discover the SUV ditched in a snowbank and arrest the man soon afterwards in a neighboring city. He's charged with possession of property obtained by crime and breaking and entering.
It's important to have a dash cam because it keeps everybody accountable. Video footage doesn't lie.
911, please stay on the line.
But while Roxanne needed the police, others go out of their way to avoid them. It's a wild chase that catches everyone by surprise.
This case begins when police officers are dispatched to a shoplifting.
I can't remember your name. Tell me,
Yes, Tasha.
The suspect, Tasha Sponsler, is accused of stealing cosmetics from a nearby store.
The 33-year-old is arrested, restrained, and placed in the back seat, while officers dig through her bag.
So as we're watching the body cam footage, law enforcement is going through her purse to see if they can locate the stolen goods.
It's a hot day, so in a routine move, they leave the car running.
Officers will leave the car idling because they want to leave the air conditioning on for whoever's inside the vehicle.
The officers are doing their paperwork. They're all standing around in the area.
But Tasha is up to something.
She's looking around. She's able to unclip the seatbelt while still handcuffed.
It appears that the officer did not secure the cuff tightly and did not secure the second lock on the cuff.
She's kind of pulling a Harry Houdini here. Once she realizes she's in the clear, she sees a window of opportunity. Literally.
She not only was able to get out of the handcuffs, but she was able to get through the cop car partition. It's only 12 inches wide. Who is Tasha? And what diet is she on?
Yeah, about that.
The situation is clearly escalated.
There are armed officers all around her, and that didn't stop her from stealing their car.
A dangerous high-speed chase is underway. And it's all caught on the stolen car's dash cam.
This chase lasts for 23 minutes, and almost half of it is at a speed in excess of 100 miles an hour. Anything can go wrong at any second.
In these pursuits, the public and innocent people are always at risk. Citizens do not know that this vehicle is being driven by a suspect. All they see is a patrol vehicle. The worst case scenario could be that this young lady could hit multiple pedestrians or kill herself.
What makes the situation even worse is during this chase, officers can see that the suspect is reaching for a shotgun that's locked inside the cruiser.
The shotguns that are mounted in patrol cars often takes only one button for it to be released.
As an officer, you have to be asking yourself, why is she doing all this? This was a simple shoplifting. Why has she escalated it to this point?
It looks like a video game type scenario because she's going off-road, she's going through spikes.
Eventually, officers realize that this suspect has no intention on stopping, so they have to use this highly, highly dangerous move.
An officer angles his vehicle to touch the suspect vehicle and actually turn the vehicle sideways in order for the suspect to lose control of this vehicle.
It's absolute chaos at this moment. The car is spinning. There's debris going everywhere.
Within seconds, Tasha is surrounded.
You just had your cruiser stolen, and now you're being faced with someone who may have a weapon on them. So your heart's beating, your adrenaline's pumping.
Cover. I got cover.
Tasha offers no explanation for her desperate getaway attempt. But there is one hint.
Yeah, true. What you got? Yep. All that for a little bit of dust.
She's hit with multiple charges, including aggravated assault, evading arrest, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. Police post the video online, and it instantly goes viral.
Slipped out of her handcuffs and, when they weren't looking, climbed into the driver's seat.
So they did post a video of the police chase to their Facebook page with the hashtag #FoolMeOnce, making light of the situation, but also showing that they're humans, they make mistakes, and they fixed it. They installed a screw in the partition that now only allows the window to open 4 inches.
They screwed that partition a little bit tighter, so no one is gonna Tasha again.
At Tasha's sentencing, the judge slams her with 45 years behind bars.
An Angelina County jury has found the woman accused of stealing a Lufkin Police Patrol unit guilty on all charges.
The harsh punishment sparks controversy.
Now, 45 years may seem extreme, but she put lives at risk. And 45 years is not only to serve as a form of rehabilitation, but also a deterrent for anybody else who might think about doing this in the future.
But sometimes criminals are stopped in their tracks before they even get started.
A couple enjoying a night out at a restaurant ends up stopping a masked and armed man.
It's 10 p.m. on a Saturday night at this chicken restaurant in Kentucky.
The masked gunman walks straight to the counter.
He says something to the cashier. She doesn't respond immediately. So he pulls out a gun.
The cashier is terrified. But what neither she or the masked gunman realize is that he couldn't have picked a worse place to rob.
No one is in the restaurant except one couple. What is unique about this couple? They are both off-duty officers.
Nicole and Chase McCowan work for the Elizabethtown Police Department.
You can see that the couple notices what's happening.
The couple quietly hatch a plan.
And I saw her hands go up like this. Is he doing what I think he's doing? And he's like, yeah. He passed the phone to me and he said, call 911. And I looked at it for a second and I'm like, no. I'm gonna help my husband.
Literally no question. We just looked at each other. Is this what's going on? Let's go.
Two off-duty officers have interrupted their date night to chase an armed robber.
Chase goes one way, and then Nicole goes the other. This actually disorients the suspect for a second.
The masked gunman drops his gun, runs out the door, but they are right behind him.
At that exact moment, a shocked customer is trying to walk inside.
And as you can see at the top of the screen, you have another patron coming into the store, clearly confused, but he's nice enough to hold the door for the police officers.
Outside the restaurant, Chase and Nicole continue their hot pursuit of the suspect on foot.
30-year-old Justin Carter was arrested in minutes, and they hold him until other officers are able to arrive. He's charged with robbery, possession of a firearm, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon.
Security video of the couple's date night heroics hits the news.
2 off-duty officers being called heroes.
He was attempting to rob a restaurant. They actually chased him and later stopped him right there.
The public is enamored with this crime-fighting duo.
Generally, when we go away from home, it's to be away from the job. We don't have to worry about seeing people we know, and this is how it turned out this time.
Law enforcement is never off-duty to the public, even when we are with our families.
And what are people most captivated by?
The officers were just married 6 months ago and had dinner at this same restaurant on their wedding night.
It's been an exciting 6 months.
Their date night may not have gone as planned, but the couple is honored for their bravery. And they get a gift certificate to a local steakhouse for another romantic night on the town.
This was absolutely an act of bravery. These officers saw someone who was in trouble, and they did what they were trained to do. And what better bonding experience than to catch a criminal together? She's a keeper, Chase.
In this store in Canada, another criminal plummets to viral fame.
On first glance, this surveillance footage from this convenience store doesn't seem too outlandish, but upon further review, you see something weird going on at checkout.
They're trying to use a debit card, but the owner of the store believes it could be stolen. He calls the police.
The man and women are answering some questions. And in this moment, you see a game time decision from the man. He's using the woman as like a battering ram.
The owner is trying to help the police to keep these suspects in the store. The male suspect eventually sort of wrestles himself away. He then tries to run to the back of the store to get out, but the door is locked. And now he's just sort of like caged mice inside of the store.
This is the moment that I'm kind of still scratching my head over. The man tries to arm himself with snacks.
He grabs like a bag of candy or chips, ready to toss it at the officer. The police officer pulls out a taser.
So he's now in a face-off with the police, and I don't think anybody would be surprised of which one of those is gonna win.
The man ditches the chips and appears to give up.
These situations are always stressful. Someone could be playing possum where they want you to get closer to them, so they may present themselves as being compliant, but until they're actually in handcuffs, you never really know. In this case, the officer was right to be hesitant.
It's never a good idea to lunge at a police officer who's pointing a taser directly at you. You would think that this is when the female suspect would just give up, but no.
She sneaks to the back like he tried to do, only to find out that it's also a locked door. So when you can't go out, you go up.
She's gone, but the officer is so busy trying to handcuff her partner in crime, he's oblivious.
The officer has the male suspect on the ground. He breaks away again, runs to the door.
The officer takes a tumble, but only to get back up, cutting off the guy before he exits from the front door and ramming him pretty hard. And if you're wondering right now, where has the woman been through all of this?
This is one of the most wild videos I have ever seen. Climbing through a ceiling, falling through a ceiling, throwing candy at an officer. I mean, all of this is completely ridiculous.
By this point, backup is arriving, and it's become this entire madhouse in the store. And thankfully, they are coming to escort this man and woman out.
Police identify the pair as Richard Pariseau and Brittany Burke. They are charged with a variety of crimes, including obstructing a peace officer and criminal mischief. A relieving end to a very unusual day.
The owner of the store actually got a certificate from the police for helping to detain them.
And he can now frame that in this store that hopefully doesn't get any other visitors like them again.
On the morning of August 13th, 2007, the town of Garlasco looked exactly as it always had. Located in northern Italy, in the province of Pavia, Garlasco was not the kind of place people associated with violent crime. It was a quiet community where daily routines rarely changed, where neighbors recognized familiar faces, and where summer mornings often unfolded with a comforting sense of predictability. Nothing about that Monday suggested that it would become one of the most discussed days in modern Italian criminal history. Inside a family home, 26-year-old Chiara Poggi was alone. Her parents and younger brother were away on vacation. She had remained behind because of work commitments. For all appearances, it was an ordinary summer day. There was no indication that anyone was watching her, no indication that danger was approaching. No indication that, within a matter of hours, her name would become known across Italy. At some point between approximately 9 and 10 o'clock that morning, something happened inside the Poggi family home. Something violent. Something brutal. Something that investigators would spend years trying to reconstruct. When the violence ended, Chiara Poggi was dead. She had suffered multiple blows to the head and face from a blunt object. Investigators would later conclude that she fought back, attempting to defend herself against her attacker. Evidence suggested a struggle. Blood was found throughout parts of the house. Her body ultimately came to rest near the staircase leading to the basement. Yet despite the severity of the crime, the scene contained an immediate contradiction. There was no sign of forced entry. No broken window. No damaged lock. No indication that an intruder had forced their way inside. The implication was unsettling. Whoever entered that home may have been someone Chiara knew, someone she trusted enough to open the door for, someone who was not perceived as a threat. As the hours passed, the house remained silent. No emergency call came from inside. No neighbor reported hearing a disturbance. No witness stepped forward claiming to have seen a suspicious stranger. The truth of what happened during those missing hours remained trapped within the walls of the house. Then, early in the afternoon, another person entered the story. His name was Alberto Stasi. At the time, he was Chiara's boyfriend. According to his account, he had tried calling her multiple times without success. When she failed to answer, he decided to go to her house and check on her personally. What happened next would become one of the most scrutinized sequences of events in the entire case. Stasi arrived at the residence. Soon afterward, he contacted emergency services. His words would echo throughout years of investigations, media coverage, and courtroom battles. "I think my girlfriend is dead." For investigators, those words marked the beginning of a mystery. For Chiara's family, they marked the beginning of a nightmare. When police arrived at the house, they were confronted with a scene of extraordinary violence. Blood, a lifeless body, a staircase that would become central to countless forensic analyses, and questions. So many questions. Who killed Chiara Poggi? Why was she targeted? What happened inside that house between 9 and 10 in the morning? And perhaps most importantly, who was the last person she willingly allowed through her front door? At first glance, some aspect of the investigation appeared straightforward. The victim was a young woman. The boyfriend had discovered the body. The crime occurred in a private residence. Historically, investigators often begin with those closest to the victim, and this case was no exception. Attention quickly focused on Alberto Stasi. Yet as authorities dug deeper, they encountered a problem that would follow the case for nearly 2 decades. The evidence was far from simple. There was no eyewitness who saw the murder. No witness who observed the killer entering or leaving the house. No confession. No clear motive. And perhaps most frustratingly, no murder weapon. The object used to inflict the fatal injuries was never recovered. Searches were conducted. Investigators examined possibilities. Theories emerged and disappeared. But the weapon itself remained missing. Without it, one of the most important pieces of physical evidence in the case simply did not exist. As investigators attempted to reconstruct the events of that morning, they found themselves increasingly dependent on indirect clues. A footprint, computer activity, movements inside the house, statements made after the discovery, forensic interpretations, behavioral observations. Each detail seemed important. Yet almost every detail was open to interpretation, and interpretation would ultimately become the defining feature of the case. Among the earliest points of controversy were observations made at the crime scene involving Alberto, Stassi himself. Questions emerged regarding his shoes. Questions emerged regarding his clothing. Questions emerged regarding how he moved through a house that contained visible blood evidence. Prosecutors believe these details raise concerns. Defense attorneys argued there were innocent explanations. Neither side could completely silence the other. As the investigation progressed, experts from different disciplines began examining the available evidence. Computer specialists analyzed digital records. Forensic experts studied blood evidence. Investigators examined footprints. Lawyers prepared competing narratives. Every piece of information seemed capable of supporting more than one conclusion. The result was a case that became increasingly complex the closer authorities looked. Outside the investigation, public interest exploded. Italian media followed every development. Television programs debated the evidence. Newspapers published extensive coverage. Commentators argued about guilt and innocence. What began as a homicide investigation gradually transformed into a national obsession. People wanted certainty. But certainty remained elusive. Years passed. Courtrooms became battlegrounds. Judges examined the same evidence and reached different conclusions. One court declared there was not enough proof. Another court saw the evidence differently. Acquittals were followed by appeals. Appeals were followed by new proceedings. The legal journey became nearly as famous as the crime itself. For some observers, the case represented a successful pursuit of justice. For others, it represented the dangers of relying too heavily on circumstantial evidence. The debate never truly ended. Eventually, after years of legal proceedings, Italy's highest court confirmed a conviction. Alberto Stassi was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the murder of Chiara Paggi. Officially, the case appeared resolved. A victim, a convicted killer, a final judgment. The story should have ended there. But it didn't. Because even after the conviction became final, the questions refused to disappear. The murder weapon was still missing. The motive remained unclear. There were still no eyewitnesses. And there were still people who believed important aspects of the case had never been fully explained. Then, nearly 18 years after Chiara's death, a dramatic development shook the case once again. Advances in forensic analysis led investigators to re-examine evidence collected long ago. Attention shifted toward another individual, a man named Andrea Sempio, a friend of Chiara's younger brother. New discussions emerged surrounding DNA evidence that had been debated for years. Suddenly, a case many believed was closed no longer felt settled. Old questions returned. New questions appeared. And the mystery that had haunted Italy since 2007 entered an entirely new chapter. Today, the murder of Chiara Paggi remains one of the most controversial criminal cases in modern Italian history. It is a story of violence hidden behind the appearance of an ordinary day. A story of forensic disputes and courtroom reversals. A story in which the official answer and the lingering doubts continue to exist side by side. But before the investigations, before the trials, before the headlines and controversy, there was simply a young woman living her life in a quiet town. To understand why this case continues to fascinate and divide people nearly 2 decades later, we first need to understand who Kiara Poggi was, the life she built, the people around her, and the ordinary world that existed before everything changed forever. Before there was a crime scene, before there were forensic reports, before television debates and courtroom battles consumed years of public attention, there was a young woman named Kiara Poggi. And like many victims whose names eventually become associated with notorious criminal cases, there is a danger that the details of her life can become overshadowed by the circumstances of her death. The headlines focus on evidence. The documentaries focus on suspects. The courts focus on guilt and innocence. But at the center of this story was a human being, a daughter, a sister, a girlfriend, a young professional with plans for the future, someone whose life was interrupted long before she had the opportunity to discover where it might lead. Kiara Poggi was born on March 31st, 1981. She grew up in the town of Garlasco, a relatively small community in the province of Pavia in northern Italy. It was the type of place where life moved at a slower pace than in Italy's major cities. Residents often knew one another. Families established roots that stretched across generations. The rhythms of daily life were familiar and predictable. For Kiara, Garlasco was home. By the summer of 2007, she was 26 years old. She had graduated with a degree in economics and was employed in an administrative role. Everything known about her public image suggested a person who approached life seriously and responsibly. She was educated, organized, and focused on building a stable future. There is something particularly tragic about crimes involving individuals whose lives appear to be moving forward in a positive direction. Not because one life is more valuable than another, but because the contrast is so stark. One moment, there's a future. The next, there's only uncertainty. Friends and acquaintances described Kiara as intelligent and dependable. She represented the image of a young woman entering adulthood with purpose. She had completed her studies. She had begun her professional life. She maintained close relationships with those around her. Nothing in the available information suggests chaotic or dangerous lifestyle. Instead, her world appears remarkably ordinary. And perhaps that is one reason the case resonated so deeply across Italy. People looked at Kiara and saw someone familiar, a daughter who worked hard, a young professional trying to build a career, a person navigating the same everyday challenges faced by countless others. There was nothing about her life that seemed destined for national attention. Yet fate had other plans. At the center of Kiara's personal life was her relationship with Alberto Stasi. At the time of the murder, Alberto was studying economics at Bocconi University in Milan, one of Italy's most prestigious academic institutions. The two were in a romantic relationship and remained in regular contact. Their communication was frequent. Phone calls, emails, internet conversations. Like many young couples in the mid-2000s, digital communication had become a normal part of maintaining their relationship. The available evidence suggests that contact between them was routine and ongoing. In the years that followed, every aspect of that relationship would be scrutinized by investigators, journalists, lawyers, and the public. Messages would be examined. Timelines would be reconstructed. Ordinary conversations would be analyzed for hidden meaning. Yet before any of that happened, they were simply a young couple sharing the everyday experiences of life. That distinction is important, because hindsight often creates the illusion that warning signs were obvious when, in reality, people living through events rarely recognize them as significant. As far as the available information shows, life continued normally during the summer of 2007. The Poggi family household reflected a familiar pattern. Kiara lived with her parents and younger brother in the family home in Garlasco. It was a stable environment, a place associated with family routines, shared meals, and everyday life. The house itself would later become one of the most analyzed locations in Italy. Investigators would spend years examining what happened within its walls. But before August 13, 2007, it was simply the place where the Poggi family lived. A home, nothing more. Then came the summer vacation. Like countless families throughout Italy, the Poggi family planned time away during August. Chiara's parents and younger brother left for a holiday in the mountains. Chiara, however, remained behind. Work responsibilities required her to stay in Garlasco. At first glance, that decision seemed completely ordinary. Adults often remain home while other family members travel. There was nothing unusual about it. Yet that simple circumstance would leave Chiara alone in the house during the days leading up to her death. Looking back, it becomes one of the most heartbreaking details in the story. Because if circumstances had been slightly different, the events that followed might never have occurred. But history is filled with such moments. Small decisions, routine choices, ordinary circumstances. None of them appear significant until after tragedy strikes. As the summer continued, Chiara maintained contact with Alberto. Investigators later established that the couple continued communicating regularly through various means. Nothing in the available evidence suggests that communication had suddenly ceased or dramatically changed. Instead, their interactions appeared consistent with an ongoing relationship. The final days before the murder unfolded with an almost unsettling normality. There were no reports of forced entry attempts, no reported threats, no dramatic confrontations contained within the evidence available to investigators. The story does not begin with chaos. It begins with routine. And perhaps that is what makes it so disturbing. Because routine creates an expectation of safety. We tend to assume that tomorrow will resemble today. That familiar places remain familiar. That trusted relationships remain trustworthy. The murder of Chiara Poggi shattered those assumptions. The final evening before her death was August 12, 2007. Investigators later determined that Chiara and Alberto communicated online that night. From the available information, nothing about those interactions publicly indicated that they would become historically significant. At the time, they were simply another conversation between two people in a relationship, perhaps discussing plans, perhaps discussing ordinary matters. Whatever the content, it represented one of the last known periods of communication in Chiara's life. Then came the morning of August 13th. At first, everything appeared normal. Chiara woke up. She remained at home. Evidence later showed activity on her computer during the early part of the morning. Internet use was recorded. Digital traces confirmed that she was engaged in ordinary activity. The details are important because they help establish a timeline, not merely for investigators, but for understanding how quickly normal life can change. One moment, a person is browsing the internet. The next, they are at the center of a mystery that will endure for decades. The digital records provide a glimpse into the final known hours of Chiara's life. A glimpse that feels both intimate and frustrating. Intimate because it reveals ordinary human activity. Frustrating because it cannot tell us what happened afterward. Eventually, the online activity stopped. The communication stopped. The digital trail ended. And beyond that point, uncertainty begins. Somewhere between approximately 9 and 10 o'clock that morning, according to the investigative timeline, Chiara encountered the person who would become responsible for the violence that followed. Yet at this stage of the story, that future remained invisible. The woman sitting in her family home had no way of knowing that she was living through the final, chapter of her life. That reality is difficult to comprehend. Human beings rarely recognize defining moments while they are occurring. The most significant day of a person's life often begins exactly like any other. The same morning routines, the same familiar surroundings, the same assumptions about what tomorrow will bring. For Kiara, August 13th likely began as just another Monday, a day of work, a day of responsibilities, a day expected to end much like the one before it. Instead, it became the day that transformed an ordinary young woman into the central figure of one of Italy's most debated criminal cases. Years later, legal arguments would dominate discussions of case. People would debate evidence. People would debate verdicts. People would debate whether justice had truly been served. Yet beneath all those debates lies a simpler truth. A 26-year-old woman lost her life. A family lost a daughter. A brother lost a sister. And an ordinary household lost the future it had imagined. As we move closer to the events of August 13th, it is important to remember that the story is not merely about investigations or trials. It is about the sudden destruction of a life that appeared stable, promising, and ordinary. Because sometimes the most unsettling crimes are not those that emerge from obvious danger. Sometimes they emerge from the middle of everyday life, from familiar streets, from familiar homes, from trusted relationships, from mornings that begin in complete normality. And that is exactly where the next chapter of the story begins. On a quiet summer morning in Garlasco, inside a house that showed no signs of forced entry, a sequence of events unfolded that would leave investigators searching for answers for nearly 2 decades. The ordinary world that surrounded Chiara Poggi was about to disappear forever. The morning of August 13, 2007, began without warning. There were no emergency calls, no reports of suspicious activity, no indication that the day would become one of the most analyzed dates in modern Italian criminal history. In Garlasco, summer continued as it always had. People went about their routines. Shops opened. Residents moved through the quiet streets. And inside the Poggi family home, Chiara Poggi was alone. Her parents and younger brother were away on vacation in the mountains. She had remained behind because of work obligations. It was a circumstance that seemed entirely ordinary at the time. Nothing about it suggested vulnerability. Nothing suggested that investigators would later spend years reconstructing the events that unfolded. Inside that house, the last known hours of Chiara's life would eventually become the foundation of countless reports, legal arguments, and forensic analyses. Yet despite all those efforts, a significant portion of that morning remains hidden behind unanswered questions. What investigators do know begins with technology. Evidence later showed that Chiara used her computer during the early part of the morning. Internet activity was recorded. Digital traces confirmed that she was awake and engaged in routine activity. In hindsight, those records carry enormous significance, not because they reveal what happened, but because they help establish what was still normal before everything changed. At some point that morning, Chiara was simply living her life, using her computer, following her routine, existing in a world where danger had not yet revealed itself. Then the trail begins to fade. The available data shows that communication and activity eventually stopped. The exact sequence of events that followed remains one of the central mysteries of the case. Investigators later concluded that the attack most likely occurred between approximately 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning. That estimate would become critical. It defined the probable window in which Chiara encountered her attacker. It also became an important reference point during years of investigative and legal proceedings. Within that narrow stretch of time, an ordinary day transformed into a homicide investigation. One of the first observations made by investigators was immediately troubling. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken lock, no shattered glass. No evidence that someone had forced their way into the residence. In many homicide investigations, forced entry provides an obvious starting point. It suggests an unknown intruder. It narrows possibilities. It creates a framework for understanding how a crime began. But in the Poggi case, that framework did not exist. The house appeared intact. Whoever entered had apparently done so without violence. That fact led investigators toward a possibility that would shape the entire investigation. Perhaps Chiara had opened the door herself. Perhaps she recognized a visitor. Perhaps she felt no fear when the person arrived. The implication was unsettling, because if that assumption was correct, the attack did not begin with a stranger breaking into a house. It began with trust. At some point during the morning, according to investigative conclusions, Chiara encountered the person who would ultimately become responsible for her death. What happened during the first moments of that encounter remains unknown. No witness was present. No recording exists. No surviving account can tell us what was said. The silence surrounding those moments has haunted the case from the very beginning. Did the visitor arrive unexpectedly? Did Chiara invite the person inside? Did a conversation occur before violence erupted? Those questions remain unanswered. What investigators do know is what happened afterward. The attack was brutal. Forensic examinations later revealed that Chiara suffered multiple blows to the head and face. The weapon was believed to be a blunt object, possibly a hammer or a similar tool. The exact instrument, however, has never been identified with certainty. One of the most frustrating realities of the case is that the murder weapon was never found. Despite searches and years of investigation, it disappeared from the story almost as completely as the truth itself. The injuries inflicted on Chiara demonstrated significant violence. Experts determined that her skull had suffered multiple fractures. The damage was severe. This was not a single impulsive strike. It was a sustained assault. The physical evidence also revealed something else. Chiara fought back. Defensive wounds were identified on her hands. Forensic specialists interpreted those injuries as evidence that she attempted to protect herself during the attack. That detail carries enormous emotional weight because it transforms a victim from a passive figure into an active participant in her own final moments. She resisted. She tried to defend herself. She struggled to survive. The violence left traces throughout the house. Blood evidence became one of the most important aspects of the crime scene. Investigators found blood in multiple areas. Patterns of blood distribution helped shape theories regarding how the attack unfolded. These traces would later be analyzed repeatedly by forensic experts and debated extensively in courtrooms. Every stain seemed to offer a clue. Yet every clue generated additional questions. According to the reconstruction accepted by investigators, the attack began on an upper level of the home. At some point during the assault, Chiara collapsed. Her body eventually ended up near the staircase leading to the basement. Whether she was pushed, dragged, or fell during the sequence of events became part of the broader effort to reconstruct the crime. What is known is where she was ultimately discovered, at the bottom of the basement staircase. Face down, surrounded by blood, the image would become one of the defining elements of the case. A staircase, a young woman, a crime scene frozen in time. When investigators arrived, they faced a challenge common to many homicide cases. The victim could reveal what happened through physical evidence, but she could not explain why it happened. The motive remained hidden, and in this case, it will remain hidden for years. As authorities examine the scene, they search for signs of theft. Sometimes robbery provides a clear explanation for violence. Sometimes missing valuables point investigators toward obvious conclusions. But that was not the situation in Garlasco. No significant theft was identified. Valuable items remained in place. There was no indication that the attacker had entered the house with the primary goal of stealing property. That absence mattered because it eliminated one of the simplest explanations. The crime did not appear to be an ordinary burglary gone wrong. Instead, investigators increasingly focused on the possibility that the victim herself had been the target. Yet even that realization provided little clarity. If Kiara was a target, why? What motive justified such violence? What event triggered the attack? The available evidence offered no clear answer, and that uncertainty will become one of the most persistent themes of the case. As forensic teams continued documenting the scene, attention turned toward the object used in the attack. The blunt force injuries strongly suggested a physical weapon. Yet despite extensive efforts, that weapon was never recovered. The significance of this fact cannot be overstated. A murder weapon can answer critical questions. It can reveal how an attack occurred. It can contain fingerprints. It can contain DNA. It can connect a suspect directly to a crime. In the Paggi case, investigators were denied all of those possibilities. The missing weapon became one of the great voids at the center of the investigation. Its absence forced authorities to rely more heavily on other forms of evidence. Blood patterns, footprints, timelines, statements, computer records, behavioral observations. Every remaining clue suddenly carried greater weight because one of the most important pieces of physical evidence was missing. As the morning turned into afternoon, the house remained silent. Hours passed between the estimated time of the attack and the eventual discovery of the body. Those missing hours became another source of mystery. No witness stepped forward claiming to have seen the killer leave. No witness reported suspicious behavior near the residence. The crime seemed to occur inside a bubble of isolation, a violent event hidden from public view, protected by circumstance, protected by timing, protected by the absence of witnesses. Eventually, however, the silence ended. Later that afternoon, Alberto Stasi arrived at the house. By then, the events of the morning had already concluded. The violence was over. The victim was dead. But the investigation was only beginning. What Stasi claimed to have seen, how he moved through the house, what he told emergency services, what investigators observed upon arrival. All of those details would soon become central to one of Italy's most controversial criminal cases. Yet before the courtroom battles, before the appeals, before years of national debate, there existed only the facts of that morning. A young woman alone at home, an unknown encounter, a brutal assault, a missing weapon, a body discovered at the bottom of a staircase, and a silence so complete that nearly 2 decades later, investigators and the public are still attempting to understand exactly what happened inside the Paggi family home between 9 and 10 o'clock on August 13th, 2007. The crime itself lasted only a short period of time. The search for answers would last far longer. And as investigators began examining the people closest to Chiara Paggi, the mystery would become even more complicated than anyone initially imagined. By the afternoon of August 13th, 2007, the crime itself was over. The violence had ended. The killer was gone. The house had fallen silent. But for investigators, the most difficult part of the story was only beginning. Every homicide investigation starts with a simple objective: reconstruct the truth. Who was responsible? How was the crime committed? Why did it happen? In the case of Chiara Paggi, however, each answer seemed to create new questions. The deeper investigators looked, the more uncertain the picture became. What initially appeared to be a straightforward investigation would eventually evolve into one of the most controversial criminal inquiries in modern Italian history. The first major figure to emerge in the investigation was the person who reported discovering the body, Alberto Stasi, Chiara's boyfriend. According to his account, the day had not begun with alarm. At some point, he attempted to contact Chiara. The calls went unanswered. At first, there may have been no reason to panic. People miss phone calls all the time. Phones are left in another room. Batteries die. Daily routines interrupt communication. But as time passed and Chiara remained unreachable, Stasi decided to visit her house personally. That decision would place him directly at the center of the investigation. When he arrived at the residence, something immediately appeared wrong. The exact details of his movements inside the house would later become the subject of extensive scrutiny. Every step, every observation, every minute. Investigators, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and judges would spend years examining those moments. What is undisputed is that Stasi eventually contacted emergency services. His statement to the dispatcher will become one of the most quoted moments in the entire case. "I think my girlfriend is dead." The words were simple, but they marked the beginning of a legal and investigative saga that would continue for nearly 2 decades. When police officers and forensic personnel arrived at the scene, they encountered the horrifying reality of what had happened. Chiara Poggi's body lay near the basement staircase. Blood evidence was present. The scene reflected a violent struggle. Yet almost immediately, investigators noticed details that they found difficult to reconcile. Those details did not directly prove guilt, but they created questions. Questions that would follow Alberto Stasi into every courtroom that examined the case. One of the earliest controversies involved something surprisingly ordinary: his shoes. At first glance, footwear seems insignificant. Yet in criminal investigations, seemingly minor observations often become crucial. The staircase area where Chiara's body was found contained visible blood evidence. According to prosecutors, the environment was one in which movement carried obvious risks of contamination. And yet, when attention turned toward Stasi's footwear, investigators found themselves asking a troubling question. Why did his shoes appear so clean? For prosecutors, this observation raised immediate concerns. If Stasi had moved through portions of the house in the manner he described, how had he avoided stepping into blood? How had he navigated such a violent scene without acquiring more visible traces of it? The issue may sound technical, but in criminal investigations, physical traces often reveal whether an account matches reality. Prosecutors believed the condition of the shoes was inconsistent with his version of events. The defense strongly disagreed. According to defense arguments, the explanation was straightforward. Stasi had not walked through the blood-covered area. He had observed the situation from a position that allowed him to see Chiara without entering the most contaminated parts of the scene. Therefore, the absence of blood on his shoes was not suspicious. It was exactly what one would expect. This disagreement became a recurring pattern throughout the case. A detail would emerge. Prosecutors would interpret it one way. Defense attorneys would interpret it another. Neither side could completely eliminate the possibility of the other's explanation. As a result, uncertainty persisted. The shoe controversy was not the only issue. Investigators also examined Stasi's clothing. Again, questions emerged. Why were there so few visible blood traces? Given the severity of the attack and conditions inside the residence, some investigators found this notable. The prosecution viewed the issue as another piece of a larger puzzle. The defense viewed it as an example of investigators trying to assign suspicious meaning to circumstances that had innocent explanations. The debate over clothing became intertwined with a broader dispute regarding Stasi's movements. Inside the house, exactly where had he gone? What had he touched? What had he seen? And how long had he remained there before calling authorities? Each question generated additional scrutiny. Investigators sought to reconstruct his actions minute by minute. But reconstruction is not the same as certainty. The passage of time complicates memory. People recall events differently. Perceptions change under stress. And in high-profile cases, every inconsistency can appear more significant than it actually is. Another topic that drew attention was Stassi's behavior at the crime scene. Some investigators commented on what they perceived as unusual calmness. Behavioral observations can be powerful, but they're also dangerous. Human beings react to trauma in remarkably different ways. Some people cry. Some panic. Some become silent. Some appear detached. The problem is that no universal standard exists. There is no correct way to discover a loved one has died. Yet the issue continued to appear throughout discussions of the case. Investigators examined his demeanor, his movements, his decisions, his timing. Every action was measured against expectations. The challenge, of course, was determining which expectations were reasonable and which were not. As attention focused increasingly on Alberto Stassi, investigators searched for evidence capable of confirming or disproving his account. That search eventually led to one of the most contested aspects of the entire case: his computer. From the beginning, Stassi maintained a clear position. He stated that he had been working on his university thesis at home during the time investigators believed Chiara was killed. If true, that claim could potentially support his innocence. If false, it could seriously damage his credibility. The computer therefore became far more than a machine. It became a potential witness. Forensic specialists analyzed digital records in an effort to determine what activity occurred during the critical time period. The findings generated immediate controversy. Records indicated activity on the computer, on the surface, that appeared consistent with Stassi's account. However, prosecutors argued that the situation was not so simple. Computer activity does not necessarily prove a person's physical presence. Some actions occur automatically. Programs operate in the background. Processes continue without direct human involvement. Therefore, prosecutors argued that the existence of digital activity could not establish that Stassi remained in the computer throughout the relevant period. The defense viewed the evidence differently. Attorneys argued that the record supported Stassi's explanation. According to their interpretation, the digital timeline aligned with his account of spending time at home working on academic tasks. Furthermore, they emphasized a critical point. No direct evidence demonstrated that Stassi left his residence, traveled to Garlasco, committed murder, and returned home. The dispute soon evolved into a battle between experts. Specialists examined logs, timelines, system activity, technical records. Each side produced interpretations that supported its own conclusions. The result was not clarity. The result was greater complexity. For years, the computer evidence remained one of the most fiercely debated aspects of the case. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining physical evidence recovered from the crime scene itself. Among the most important discoveries was a shoe print found in blood. Footprints can be extraordinarily valuable. Unlike eyewitness testimony, they do not forget. Unlike suspects, they do not lie. But they still require interpretation. And interpretation was exactly where the controversy began. Experts attempted to determine the size of the shoe, the pattern of the sole, the possible manufacturer, and most importantly, whether the print could be connected to Alberto Stassi. The process proved far more difficult than many expected. Different examinations produced different conclusions. Experts disagreed. Interpretations changed. Arguments emerged concerning methodology and reliability. What should have been a straightforward forensic question became another source of uncertainty. The footprint remained important, but it never delivered the kind of decisive answer investigators hoped to obtain. As the inquiry expanded, investigators examined another category of evidence that would attract enormous public attention: the contents of Chiara's computer. During forensic examinations, authorities discovered searches and materials involving private sexual topics. In many cases, such findings would remain relatively unremarkable. Private interests are common. Human curiosity is common. But this was not an ordinary investigation. Media organizations quickly seized upon the information. Speculation flourished. Commentators suggested various theories. Some wondered whether Chiara had discovered something related to her boyfriend. Others proposed entirely different possibilities. The public conversation became increasingly intense. Yet investigators faced a crucial problem. Speculation is not evidence. No definitive proof established that these discoveries provided a motive for murder. No clear connection could be demonstrated. As a result, the material remained controversial but inconclusive. Even so, discussions surrounding the computer findings continued appearing throughout legal proceedings and media coverage. By this stage, investigators faced a difficult reality. Years of effort had produced numerous clues. Yet the central questions remained unresolved. There was no eyewitness, no person who could testify to having seen the murder occur, no witness who could identify the killer entering or leaving the house. There was no murder weapon. The blunt object used to inflict the fatal injuries had never been recovered. There was no confession, no statement from a suspect admitting responsibility. There was no clearly established motive. Various theories existed, but none achieved universal acceptance. And because these traditional pillars of a criminal case were absent, investigators increasingly relied upon circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is not inherently weak. Many convictions are built upon it, but such evidence requires interpretation. It asks investigators and jurors to infer conclusions from surrounding facts. And whenever interpretation becomes necessary, disagreement becomes possible. That reality defined the Chiara Poggi investigation. Every major piece of evidence seemed open to competing explanations. The shoes, the clothing, the behavior, the computer records, the footprint, the forensic findings, the lack of forced entry. Each element pointed toward possibilities. Yet none seemed capable of ending the debate. As months turned into years, the investigation evolved into something larger than a search for a killer. It became a battle over interpretation itself. Two sides examining the same evidence. Two sides constructing different narratives. Two sides convinced they understood the truth. And eventually, those competing narratives would collide in courtrooms across Italy, where judges would be asked to answer a question that investigators had struggled with from the very beginning. Did the available evidence truly reveal what happened inside the Poggi family home on the morning of August 13th, 2007? Or did the mystery remain unsolved? The next chapter of the story would attempt to answer that question. And in doing so, it would divide courts, legal experts, journalists, and the Italian public for years to come. By the time investigators completed the initial stages of the Chiara Poggi murder inquiry, the case had already become one of the most closely watched criminal investigations in Italy. What had begun as a homicide inside a quiet family home in Garlasco was rapidly evolving into something much larger. The public wanted answers. The media wanted answers. Most importantly, Chiara's family wanted answers. But despite years of investigative work, the central challenge remained unchanged. The case contained numerous suspicious circumstances. Yet many of the traditional foundations of a criminal prosecution were missing. There was no murder weapon. There was no eyewitness. There was no confession. There was no universally accepted motive. As a result, the Italian justice system found itself confronting one of the most difficult questions any court can face. When direct evidence is limited, how much weight should be given to circumstantial evidence? The answer would vary dramatically depending on which courtroom happened to be examining the case. As prosecutors prepared their case against Alberto Stasi, they argued that the totality of the evidence pointed toward a single conclusion. They did not claim that one isolated piece of evidence proved guilt beyond doubt. Instead, they presented a broader picture, a collection of circumstances, a pattern, an accumulation of observations that, in their view, could not be ignored. At the center of that picture stood Alberto Stasi himself. He was the victim's boyfriend. He was the person who reported finding the body. His behavior after the discovery had drawn attention. Questions surrounded his shoes. Questions surrounded his clothing. Questions surrounded the timeline he provided. Questions surrounded the computer activity that formed the basis of his alibi. For prosecutors, these issues formed a chain. Perhaps no single link was decisive, but together, they argued, the chain pointed toward responsibility. The defense saw the situation entirely differently. According to Stasi's lawyers, prosecutors were attempting to transform uncertainty into proof. They argued that every major piece of evidence contained alternative explanations. The lack of blood on his shoes, the absence of significant bloodstains on his clothing, the interpretation of computer records, the disputed footprint evidence. None of these elements, they argued, directly demonstrated murder. More importantly, they emphasized a recurring theme that would appear throughout years of litigation. The burden of proof belonged to the prosecution. Suspicion was not enough. Questions were not enough. Even strong suspicion was not enough. To convict someone of murder, the evidence had to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The first major judicial test of these competing arguments arrived in 2009. The trial attracted enormous attention. Journalists followed developments closely. Television programs discussed the evidence in detail. Legal experts debated the strengths and weaknesses of the prosecution's theory. Public interest extended far beyond Garlasco. The entire country seemed invested in the outcome. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors presented the evidence they believed connected Stasi to the crime. They argued that the circumstances surrounding the discovery of the body raised legitimate concerns. They pointed to inconsistencies they believed existed within the broader narrative of events. They emphasized forensic observations and investigative findings developed over the course of the inquiry. The defense responded by highlighting the weaknesses within the prosecution's case. Again and again, attorneys returned to the same fundamental point. Where was the murder weapon? Who witnessed the crime? What direct evidence proved Alberto Stasi had killed Chiara Paggi? The absence of clear answers remained difficult to ignore. When the court delivered its verdict, the result surprised many observers. Alberto Stasi was acquitted. The court concluded that the available evidence was insufficient to support a conviction. For the defense, the decision represented validation. The justice system had examined the allegations and determined that proof was lacking. For prosecutors and members of Chiara's family, however, the verdict was deeply disappointing. The acquittal did not end the controversy. If anything, it intensified it. Supporters of the prosecution believed the evidence had been underestimated. Supporters of the defense argued that the verdict demonstrated the weakness of the accusations. The debate continued almost immediately. And because the Italian legal system allows for extensive appellate review, the story was far from over. The years that followed became a remarkable demonstration of how differently courts can interpret the same evidence. As appeals moved forward, prosecutors continued pursuing the case. They remained convinced that the available facts pointed toward Stasi. The defense remained equally convinced that investigators had focused too narrowly on one suspect, while failing to resolve the fundamental weaknesses in the evidence. Court after court revisited the material. Experts revisited forensic findings. Arguments were repeated. Counterarguments followed. The legal battle grew increasingly complex. For ordinary observers, the process became difficult to follow. The same evidence seemed capable of generating entirely different conclusions depending on who examined it. In 2011, another major development occurred. A subsequent appellate proceeding again produced a result favorable to Stassi. Another acquittal. For the second time, a court determined that the evidence did not justify a murder conviction. The decision reinforced the perception that the case remained deeply uncertain. If multiple courts had reviewed the evidence and declined to convict, some observers wondered whether the prosecution's theory simply lacked sufficient support. Yet others reached the opposite conclusion. They believed that important evidence had not been fully appreciated. They believed justice remained incomplete. For Chiara Poggi's family, the second acquittal represented another painful setback. Years had already passed since her death. The legal process seemed endless. Every new hearing reopened old wounds. Every new ruling generated fresh controversy. Yet they continued seeking answers. The case, however, was not finished. In 2013, the situation changed dramatically. Italy's Court of Cassation, the country's highest court for criminal matters, reviewed aspects of proceedings. Its decision would alter the direction of the case once again. Rather than allowing the acquittals to stand unquestioned, the court identified concerns regarding how certain evidence had been evaluated. The ruling did not itself establish guilt, nor did it immediately produce a conviction. Instead, it ordered a new examination of the case. A new trial would take place. The decision demonstrated one of the central realities of the Chiara Poggi case. The evidence was sufficiently complex that experienced judges could reach profoundly different conclusions about its meaning. For some observers, the Court of Cassation's intervention suggested that earlier courts had failed to properly assess important elements of the evidence. For others, it demonstrated the instability of a case built largely on interpretation. Regardless of perspective, one fact was undeniable. The legal battle would continue. The retrial became one of the most anticipated chapters in the entire saga. Years had passed since Chiara's death. Yet the central questions remained unresolved. The prosecution once again argued that the collection of circumstantial evidence pointed toward Alberto Stassi. The defense once again challenged those conclusions. But this time, the outcome would be different. In 2014, the retrial produced a dramatic reversal. Alberto Stassi was convicted. The sentence imposed was 16 years in prison. The decision stunned many observers. After years of acquittals and uncertainty, a court had now reached the opposite conclusion. The evidence itself had not fundamentally changed. The murder weapon was still missing. No eyewitness had emerged. No confession existed. And yet the interpretation of the evidence had changed. That reality became one of the defining features of public discussions surrounding the case. How could the same investigation generate such different outcomes? Supporters of the conviction argued that the retrial had finally recognized the significance of the available evidence. They believed the overall picture pointed clearly toward Stassi. Supporters of the defense viewed the conviction as proof of the dangers inherent in circumstantial cases. They argued that uncertainty remained uncertainty, regardless of how many times evidence was re-examined. The legal process moved forward one final time. In 2015, Italy's Supreme Court of Cassation delivered the ruling that would officially conclude the judicial battle. The court confirmed the conviction. Alberto Stassi was declared legally responsible for the murder of Chiara Poggi. The 16-year sentence remained in place. After nearly 8 years of investigations, hearings, appeals, reversals, and retrials, the case appeared to have reached its conclusion, at least from a legal perspective. For prosecutors, the ruling represented success. For Chiara's family, it represented a measure of justice after years of uncertainty. For Stassi, it marked the beginning of imprisonment. Yet even after the final judgment, one important detail remained unchanged. Alberto Stassi continued maintaining his innocence. He did not confess. He did not acknowledge responsibility. Instead, he consistently asserted that he had not killed Kiara Paggi. That continued denial ensured that debate surrounding the case would not disappear. Indeed, the controversy persisted precisely because so many questions remained unanswered. The conviction resolved the legal question of responsibility, but it did not eliminate every mystery. The murder weapon was still missing. The motive remained unclear. No witness had ever identified the killer. The forensic evidence remained disputed in certain respects. And, perhaps most importantly, different courts had reached dramatically different conclusions while examining much of the same material. Those contradictions fascinated legal scholars, journalists, and members of the public. Some viewed the final verdict as the culmination of a difficult but ultimately successful search for justice. Others viewed the case as an example of how circumstantial evidence can generate persistent doubt, even after conviction. Both perspectives continued to exist long after the legal proceedings ended. In many criminal cases, a final verdict brings closure. The public gradually loses interest. The story fades from headlines. The legal process concludes. The Kiara Paggi case was different. Its unresolved mysteries refused to disappear. Years after the conviction became final, people continued debating what had happened inside the Paggi family home on August 13, 2007. Was every question truly answered? Had investigators correctly identified the full truth? Or were important pieces of the story still missing? For a time, those questions remained largely theoretical. The courts had spoken. The conviction stood. The case appeared settled. But nearly a decade later, developments would emerge that nobody expected. Advances in forensic science would bring renewed attention to evidence collected years earlier. Investigators would begin re-examining old assumptions. A new name would enter public discussion. And a case that many believed had finally reached its conclusion would suddenly find itself at the center of controversy once again. The legal battle may have ended in 2015. The search for certainty had not. For many criminal cases, a final verdict marks the end of the story. The courts reach a conclusion. The appeals are exhausted. The legal system delivers its judgment. Gradually, public attention moves elsewhere. The case becomes part of history. The murder of Kiara Paggi never followed that pattern. Even after Italy's Supreme Court cassation confirmed Alberto Stassi's conviction in 2015, a sense of uncertainty continued to surround the case. Officially, the judicial process had reached its conclusion. A person had been convicted. A sentence had been imposed. From a legal standpoint, responsibility had been assigned. Yet many of the questions that had haunted the investigation from the beginning remained unanswered. The murder weapon had never been found. The motive remained unclear. There were still no eyewitnesses to crime. There was still no confession. And perhaps most importantly, the path to conviction had been extraordinarily complicated, involving acquittals, appeals, retrials, and conflicting judicial interpretations of the same body of evidence. As a result, the case remained a subject of discussion throughout Italy long after the courtroom battles ended. For some observers, the conviction represented justice finally achieved after years of legal complexity. For others, the unresolved mysteries continued to create doubts. Neither side could fully silence the other. The passage of time did little to change that reality. Years went by. Italy changed. New crimes captured public attention. New investigations filled newspaper headlines. Yet the name Kiara Paggi never completely disappeared from public memory. Part of the reason was the extraordinary nature of the case itself. The murder had occurred inside a family home. The victim appeared to have known her attacker. The evidence had generated endless debate. The judicial process had produced dramatically different outcomes before finally settling on a conviction. The story possessed all the elements of a mystery that refused to fade. And then, nearly 18 years after the murder, something remarkable happened. The case returned to the center of national attention. In 2025 and continuing into 2026, Italian investigators reopened significant aspects of the inquiry. The development shocked many observers. Most people assumed that the legal history of the case had already been written. Yet advances in forensic science created new opportunities to examine evidence collected years earlier. Modern investigative techniques are capable of extracting information from biological material that may have been impossible to analyze fully in the past. Evidence that once appeared exhausted can sometimes reveal new possibilities. And in the Chiara Poggi case, those possibilities proved impossible to ignore. Investigators revisited forensic materials preserved from the original inquiry. Attention soon focused on one particular area of evidence: material recovered from beneath Chiara's fingernails. The significance of such evidence is obvious. Defensive wounds had already suggested that Chiara fought back against her attacker. If she struggled physically with the person who attacked her, biological traces might have been transferred during the confrontation. For years, such possibilities have remained part of the broader discussion surrounding the case. Now, advances in DNA analysis encourage investigators to look again. The renewed examination introduced a name that had appeared before in connection with the investigation but had never become central to the official outcome: Andrea Sempio. Sempio was a friend of Chiara's younger brother. Importantly, he was not a completely new figure emerging from nowhere. Years earlier, investigators had already examined him during preliminary stages of inquiry. At that time, however, he was not prosecuted. The focus of the case remained elsewhere. The legal process continued. Eventually, Alberto Stasi was convicted. For many years afterward, Sempio remained largely outside the public spotlight surrounding the case. The reopening of the investigation changed that. According to the renewed inquiry, modern DNA analyses suggested that genetic material recovered from beneath Chiara's fingernails could be compatible with Andrea Sempio. The announcement immediately generated intense public discussion. Media outlets across Italy began reporting on the new developments. Legal experts debated their significance. Journalists revisited old theories. Commentators questioned whether the new evidence could alter long-standing assumptions about the case. The reaction was immediate because the implications appeared enormous. If new forensic evidence pointed toward another individual, what did that mean for the conviction of Alberto Stasi? Could both circumstances be true? Could investigators have overlooked something important during the original inquiry? Could additional individuals have been involved? Or would the new analysis ultimately prove less significant than early reports suggested? At that stage, no definitive answers existed. What did exist was controversy. And controversy had followed the Garlasco case from the very beginning. Andrea Sempio strongly denied any involvement in the murder. He rejected accusations and maintained his innocence. His position was clear. The renewed investigative focus did not constitute proof of guilt. It represented an avenue of inquiry, a possibility requiring examination. That distinction became critically important. Public discussion often moves faster than legal reality. Speculation can spread rapidly. Yet, investigators still face the same obligation that had existed in 2007. Evidence had to be evaluated carefully. Conclusions had to be supported by facts. The search for truth remained ongoing. As a renewed investigation unfolded, one question dominated national debate. Could a mistake have occurred? The possibility of wrongful convictions is among the most sensitive topics in any justice system. No legal institution welcomes such discussions. Yet every legal institution must be willing to confront them when necessary. The reopening of the Poggi case inevitably revived those concerns. Some observers argued that the new DNA findings justified a comprehensive re-examination of earlier conclusions. Others cautioned against drawing premature conclusions from limited information. Both positions reflected the extraordinary complexity of the case. After all, this was never a simple investigation. Nearly every major aspect of the inquiry had generated disagreement. The forensic evidence, the footprint evidence, the computer evidence, the interpretation of behavior, the absence of a clear motive, the lack of a murder weapon, the reopened investigation simply added another chapter to an already complicated story. And yet, despite years of legal proceedings and countless hours of analysis, the same fundamental mysteries remain remarkably intact. What was the murder weapon? This question has existed since the first day of the investigation. The object used to inflict the fatal injuries has never been recovered. Without it, an important piece of the puzzle remains missing. What was the motive? This question may be even more difficult. Investigators and courts examined various possibilities over the years, yet no universally accepted explanation ever emerged. Why was Kiara targeted? What event or emotion triggered such extreme violence? The available evidence has never provided a completely satisfying answer. Did Kiara know exactly who stood at her door that morning? The absence of forced entry strongly suggests familiarity. Investigators long believed that she may have voluntarily allowed the attacker inside. If true, that detail adds another layer of tragedy to the case. Trust may have preceded violence. A familiar face may have entered a familiar home. Then everything changed. Was Alberto Stasi truly the only person responsible? The courts answer that question one way. The renewed investigation has encouraged others to continue asking it. The debate remains active. Can new DNA evidence fundamentally alter the understanding of the case? This may be the most important unresolved question of all. Modern forensic science has transformed countless investigations around the world. Sometimes it confirms previous conclusions. Sometimes it challenges them. Whether it will do either in the Kiara Paggi case remains uncertain. And finally, perhaps the most haunting question, will the full truth ever be known? Some criminal cases reach a point where every major question receives a clear answer. Others remain suspended between certainty and doubt. The murder of Kiara Paggi appears to belong to the second category. The legal system has delivered its judgment, yet the search for complete understanding continues. Throughout years of media coverage, public debate, and legal conflict, it is easy to lose sight of the person at the center of the story. Kiara Paggi was 26 years old. She was not a legal controversy. She was not a forensic debate. She was not a courtroom exhibit. She was a young woman with a future, a daughter whose parents lost a child, a sister whose family lost someone they loved, a person whose life ended inside her own home on an August morning in 2007. Everything that followed, the investigations, the trials, the appeals, the documentaries, the headlines began with that loss. The legacy of the Garlasco case therefore extends beyond questions of guilt or innocence. It is also a reminder of how fragile certainty can be, how difficult it can be to reconstruct the truth after violence, how forensic science evolves, how legal systems struggle with ambiguity, and how some cases continue asking questions long after society expects answers. Today, nearly 2 decades after Kiara Paggi's death, the case remains one of the most debated criminal mysteries in modern Italian history. A conviction exists. A victim remains mourned. New investigations continue. And the search for certainty is still not over. Perhaps one day the remaining questions will finally be answered. Perhaps new evidence will bring greater clarity. Or perhaps the case will continue occupying that uncomfortable space between resolution and doubt. What is certain is this. On the morning of August 13th, 2007, A young woman lost her life inside the place where she should have been safest. The consequences of that morning have echoed across nearly 20 years of Italian history. And even now, the silence left behind by Chiara Poggi's final hours continues to demand an answer. Nearly 2 decades have passed since the morning that changed everything. The calendars have turned through countless seasons. Governments have changed. New headlines have replaced old ones. Entire generations have grown up knowing the name Chiara Poggi only through television documentaries, newspaper archives, podcasts, and courtroom summaries. Yet despite the passage of time, the story refuses to fade. Some crimes become historical records. The murder of Chiara Poggi became something else. It became a question that continues to echo through courtrooms, forensic laboratories, newsrooms, and private conversations across Italy. What really happened inside that house in Garlasco on the morning of August 13, 2007? For Chiara's family, the passage of time can never erase the fundamental reality of what was lost. Behind every legal argument and every forensic dispute stands an absence that cannot be measured by court documents. A daughter never came home. A sister never grew older. A future disappeared. When people discuss famous criminal cases, there is often a tendency to focus on mystery, the unanswered questions, the conflicting evidence, the dramatic twists, the legal battles. But for families, true crime is never primarily about mystery. It is about loss. The center of the story is not the investigation. The center of the story is the person who is no longer there. In many ways, that truth has remained constant throughout every phase of the Garlasco case, whether one focuses on the conviction of Alberto Stasi, whether one focuses on a renewed investigation involving Andrea Sempio, whether one believes the legal system reached the correct conclusion or still has questions to answer. None of those debates change what happened to Chiara Poggi. A young woman died violently inside her own home. Everything else came afterward. The years following the murder demonstrated how difficult it can be for modern societies to separate certainty from probability. The public often wants criminal investigations to function like puzzles. Collect enough pieces. Find the missing image. Reveal the answer. Reality is rarely so simple. Investigators work with incomplete information. Witnesses forget. Evidence deteriorates. Technology evolves. Interpretations change. What appears definitive in one decade may become questionable in another. The Chiara Poggi case illustrates this challenge better than almost any other modern Italian investigation. Again and again, experts examine the same facts and reach different conclusions. Again and again, courts reviewed the same evidence and produced different outcomes. Again and again, certainty seemed close before slipping away. Perhaps that is why the case continues to fascinate people. Not because it provides easy answers, but because it demonstrates how difficult the search for truth can be. At first glance, many aspects of the case appear straightforward. A victim, a crime scene, a suspect, a prosecution, a conviction. Yet, when observers begin looking closer, layers of complexity emerge. The missing murder weapon, the disputed forensic interpretations, the debates surrounding footprints, the controversies involving computer evidence, the lack of eyewitnesses, the absence of a clearly established motive, and now, years later, renewed discussion surrounding DNA evidence. Each layer complicates the narrative. Each layer reminds us that criminal investigations are rarely neat. Human beings naturally seek certainty. We want definitive endings. We want complete explanations. We want every question answered. The Garlasco case repeatedly resisted those expectations. Even after a final conviction, uncertainty remained. Even after years of analysis, mystery survived. Even after nearly 20 years, investigators continue examining possibilities. That persistence says something important, not only about this case, but about justice itself. The pursuit of truth is not always a straight line. Sometimes it moves forward. Sometimes it doubles back. Sometimes it revisits conclusions once thought settled. The reopening of the investigation in 2025 and 2026 reminded the public of that reality. Many people had assumed the story was over. Instead, it entered a new chapter. Whether those developments ultimately change the historical understanding of the case remains unknown. Perhaps the renewed inquiry will confirm previous conclusions. Perhaps it will raise new questions. Perhaps it will uncover evidence capable of reshaping the narrative entirely. At the moment, nobody knows. And that uncertainty is precisely what has defined the case from the beginning. Imagine, for a moment, the house in Garlasco, not as a crime scene, not as evidence, not as a location marked on investigative diagrams. Imagine it as it existed before August 13th, 2007. A family home, a place where ordinary life unfolded. Meals were shared. Conversations took place. Plans for the future were discussed. Like countless other homes across Italy, it was a place associated with routine and familiarity. Then one morning, it became something else. A place forever connected to tragedy. That transformation is among the most heartbreaking aspects of violent crime. Locations survive. People do not. The walls remain standing. The memories become divided into two periods: before and after. For the Poggi family, August 13th became that dividing line. Every event in life thereafter existed on one side of that date or the other. The same is true, in a different way, for the town of Garlasco itself. Before the murder, the town was largely unknown outside its region. Afterward, its name became permanently associated with one of Italy's most controversial criminal cases. The story altered not only individual lives, but also the identity of a community. Years later, journalists, authors, and legal commentators continue returning to the case, not because of sensationalism alone, but because it touches upon larger questions. How reliable is forensic evidence? How should courts evaluate circumstantial cases? Can advances in science change our understanding of old crimes? What happens when legal certainty and public doubt coexist? These questions extend beyond Garlasco. They apply to criminal justice systems around the world. The case therefore occupies a unique position. It is simultaneously a personal tragedy, a legal controversy, and a broader reflection on the limits of human knowledge. There is another reason the story continues to resonate. It challenges a comforting assumption many people carry through life: the belief that danger announces itself, the belief that major tragedies arrive with warning signs. The available evidence suggests that Chiara's final morning began normally. She used her computer. She followed familiar routines. Nothing indicated that she was approaching the final hours of her life. That reality can feel deeply unsettling, because it reminds us how fragile ordinary life can be, how quickly normality can disappear, how little people sometimes know about the significance of the moments they are living. The final chapter of the Chiara Poggi case has not yet been written. That statement would have seemed impossible to many observers a decade ago, yet it remains true today. Investigations continue. Questions remain. New evidence is examined. Old conclusions are reconsidered. The story remains unfinished. What future historians will ultimately write about the case is impossible to predict. Perhaps new discoveries will provide clarity. Perhaps they will deepen existing uncertainties. Perhaps some questions will never be answered at all. Criminal history contains many such mysteries. Cases where legal conclusions exist but complete certainty remains elusive. Cases where facts and interpretations continue to compete long after the verdict. cases where time solves some problems while creating others. The murder of Chiara Poggi belongs among them. And so we arrive at the end of this story. Not an ending defined by complete resolution, but an ending defined by remembrance. Because regardless of future developments, one fact remains unchanged. On August 13th, 2007, Chiara Poggi lost her life. Everything that followed, the investigations, the trials, the appeals, the debates, the renewed inquiries, exists because of that single event. The true measure of the case is therefore not the controversy it generated. It is the life that was taken. As long as questions remain, investigators will continue searching. As long as evidence exists, experts will continue analyzing. As long as uncertainty survives, public interest will endure. But beneath every discussion lies the same quiet truth. A young woman never had the chance to finish the life she was building. And nearly 20 years later, the search for the complete truth about what happened to her is still not over. The house in Garlasco became famous because of a mystery. Chiara Poggi should be remembered because she was far more than that mystery. She was the reason the search for answers began in the first place.